Father James Martin and Bishop Joseph Strickland are in the news once again. We'll get to that in a moment. But you may have seen this already being reported, so we'll get to it immediately, and I will show you why I think this is a little premature, but here we go. So Damian Thompson, who is a English Catholic, a traditionally minded English Catholic, reports on X, and he's a journalist, he reports that Pope Leo will grant a Latin Mass extension, that's an interesting word there, to any bishop of England and Wales who asks for one. The papal nuncio has informed the bishops, several of whom have already secured permission for the traditional Latin Mass in their dioceses. So it seems that any incoming Archbishop of Westminster will continue Cardinal Nichols's enlightened policy, and the TLM is likewise safe in Southwark. Now, this is a Catholic YouTuber who doesn't do Catholic content on YouTube so much, but he does ask, what about the US? Why are we being treated differently? And it's being pointed out this is up to the local bishop, right? And as a general thing, I have a different idea as to why the US might not be getting this treatment, because we know that the bishops who have been actively suppressing the TLM in the US all cite direct queries from the Vatican asking how they're implementing Traditionis Custodes in their diocese, and then recommending the most draconian implementation. For whatever reason, they view the US differently than England and Wales. And part of it is because the two largest hotbeds for the traditional Catholic movement are the United States and France. My suspicion is it's the resistance movements here, especially around online activity, that is part of the reason. But again, the word extension is an interesting word here. The Traditionis Custodes, every implementation of it, usually if there's an extension granted, it's a 2 or 3 year extension before they're expected to wipe out their TLMs indefinitely or completely. So Pope Leo will grant a Latin Mass extension to any bishop in England and Wales who asks for one. Does that mean that they get to keep Traditionis Custodes as the standard without further restrictions? Or does it mean they have 2 to 3 years more before they wipe it out completely? Inquiring minds would like to know. I don't see this necessarily as good news, other than you won't have to make plans and uncomfortable decisions about going to Mass with the SSPX or an independent priest, or driving 3 hours each way to find an FSSP or Institute of Christ the King parish for that amount of time. That's how I look at this. I will, of course, keep you posted as the story develops. Now, you may have seen this. Michael Haynes posted this to X. This inevitably caused a gigantic firestorm online. James Martin concelebrated a Mass. Here's the story from Michael Haynes. On November 8th, an openly member of the James Martin crowd, ABC anchor Gio Benitez was confirmed into the Catholic Church. You cannot receive a sacrament when you're not in a state of grace. This is someone who is proud of their James Martin way of living. The person's spouse in the eyes of the law was his sponsor. During the Mass, they both received Holy Communion. Father James Martin concelebrated the Mass, and Benitez credits James Martin for leading him into the church. And then there's video footage of this with copyrighted music. You can see. Nope. Not going to play that game with the copyright. But you see here, there it is, James Martin laying hands on the confirmee. It goes on like that. I'll spare you the sordid video details. I will have a link to it in the show notes at returntotradition.org, and at the show notes at the Anthony Stine subreddit, rather, after this broadcast. Thank you for gifting 5 memberships, Pascas. It's appreciated. Now, you may be wondering, well, what's the bishop going to do? And the answer is the bishop will do nothing. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops actually is meeting, and Bishop Strickland had some questions. So, well, just let Bishop Strickland speak for himself on this.
But since we're in the area of doctrine,
it's so quiet you won't be able to hear him because it's a Twitter video. But he basically asks the bishops to respond to Father James Martin overseeing the confirmation, celebrating the Mass of reception of Holy Communion to somebody who is living openly in a way that defies the church's teachings, is an unrepentant public sinner. He asks them to do something about this. We need to address this. And I will just go here to show you what their response was at the end of the question. We'll mute it because the audio doesn't matter. You can't hear it anyway because it's a Twitter video. But here he is asking the question, saying, we need to do something. And here's the bishop's response. They are, well, thank you, Bishop Strickland. And then they move on to the next item in their agenda, because the next item in their agenda to them is more important. And I will get to you in a moment what their next item was. But for now, the immediate response to this was online from Catholics saying, wonderful. It's good that Bishop Strickland is doing this, at least for most Catholics, not from everybody. There is a certain segment of the laity who do not like Bishop Strickland. And that also is doubly true for a certain segment of the priests that are online. And there's a priest who is a Dominican, fairly well regarded, not exactly an extremist by any stretch, named Father Peter Totalben. He is a Dominican, and he lit up his own controversy when he decided he didn't really like what Bishop Strickland was doing. He said, Strickland's intervention was the classic middle school tactic. Have people on here ever been to a 7th grade before? Strickland's interruptions sounded like when my students raised their hand during a discussion about the Mass to ask, how do tornadoes form? You see, Strickland, when he got up and asked a question to them and brought this to the attention of the bishops, he was interrupting the normal discussion. I don't know, maybe because when a celebrity priest is facilitating a public figure to publicly commit an act of sacrilege, the bishop should take it seriously. That was my thought on this. That the fate of everyone's souls involved in that process was more important than whatever silly thing the bishops were discussing. Now, this lit up a firestorm for this priest, who then, had to go on to it. And I will show you something he said here that is absolutely correct about this whole situation. And we'll get to that when we get to it. But he says, the reason why I'm making a big deal about this is because in falsely proclaiming himself to be the only one willing to stand up for the truth, he is actively spreading the falsehood on this website, meaning X, that the other bishops are comparatively faithless. Before I go any further, what other bishops have you seen speak out against James Martin? Excuse me. You get a few ordinaries here and there who won't let him in their diocese, who say some things that are very carefully worded, showing you that they don't want him teaching in their diocese. But James Martin otherwise has a free pass to teach his heresies in almost every diocese in the country. Why is that? What other bishops stand up against him? Virtually none of them. But the priest says the opposite of Strickland being the only one doing this is true. The bishops that people like to excoriate on here are mostly very faithful men who labor hard to build up the church and defend orthodoxy and morality. It's just that the work that they do, which actually makes a huge difference, isn't flashy, and its payoff is long-term and diffuse. Now, the bishops that I see people go after all the time, this does not apply to. We're talking the Supiches, the Tobins. Those types of bishops are not people who are quietly doing work that is good for the church. They're not. They're promoters of error. It's actually bishops like Strickland, the priest says, who do comparatively little to defend the truth. And the little that they do isn't very effective. They just get a lot of undeserved praise because what they do is showy and flashy and plays to the passion of their fans. The words showy and flashy do not apply to Bishop Strickland. But okay, whatever. When in reality, the true heroes of our church right now are the bishops who get unjustly maligned on this website. Remember, as always, the information you get on Catholic Twitter is always wrong, and you'll misunderstand what is going on in the church if you believe it. And that's painting with a broad brush. The information on Catholic Twitter is not always wrong. He got pushback for this, of course, because it's Bishop Strickland we're talking about here. So he had to defend himself. He says, the comments on this post just go to show you that people on here just don't know what the USCCB is or what it is for. Another sign that it's a grift, he is calling Bishop Strickland a grifter. A grifter is a con artist. Another sign that it's a grift is the way that Strickland made the event about James Martin, when he wasn't even really involved. I showed you the video of him laying hands on that priest. Bishop Father James Martin was celebrating the Mass. To say he wasn't involved is not being accurate. It was actually the Paulists and out at St. Paul's. Martin's just celebrated. That's not exactly a small deal. But Martin's name generates more rage and clicks and dollars for Strickland's marks. I mean donors. Yes, if you're a fan of Bishop Strickland, if you support what he does, you are a mark, meaning a victim of his. Both of these points just go to show you once more that if you get your information from Catholic Twitter, your information will be wrong. Then why are you on there, Father Peter? Now, I would be remiss if I didn't show you a little bit of a pushback. And I will give you the one that, of course, the highest profile. Dr. Taylor Marshall. He says, I have known Bishop Strickland for many years, and he is one of the kindest and holiest priests I've ever met. He radiates the love of Jesus Christ, preaches powerful sermons, and I've never heard him mention money. Unlike other priests, he only talks about Christ, Mary, and the gospel. My wife and I were at dinner with him once at a restaurant, and a woman approached him and said, Are you a Catholic priest? Can I talk to you? Tears came down her face, and she opened up, and he tenderly ministered to her in a graceful way. He is a shepherd. He's always ready to hear confessions. He is kind and generous with his time. I believe you have Bishop Strickland all wrong. You're publicly assassinating his character without having met him. I fear that on Judgment Day, Christ our Lord may ask you about your tweets about Bishop Strickland. Please reassess. And of course, he responds saying, this is not my first rodeo, so I'm not exactly impressed with these kinds of defenses of priests. I know too much to be impressed by them. And he goes on like that. Now, I would also not be doing a disservice to you and to the truth if I did not show you what this priest said that is 100% accurate, that no one ever points out about James Martin. And we really need to remember to do that in the future. Because as it turns out, James Martin is actually much more dangerous than merely teaching error publicly. I want you to consider what he's saying here. And you have to ask yourself, who does Father James Martin actually answer to? He says, people are so exercised, I'm assuming he means excited, when you're using a mobile device on X, it's way easy to make typos. He says, people are so excited about Martin's problematic advocacy for those weird issues that James Martin is interested in, that they have mostly failed to notice that this is only one part of the larger problem with his ministry. His ministry is to be the chaplain for the beautiful people. Martin is the kind of priest who reliably will show up at high society events like the Met Gala, a socialite who will cultivate relationships with all the right sort of people. And Martin sees his ministry in general of basically reassuring the beautiful people that Jesus agrees with them, that their values don't even need to be baptized because they are already fine. Martin's project is to ransack Christianity to find ideas that he can revise so that he can give some sort of spirituality to the value system and worldview of the beautiful people. Because after all, since they are the elite and the beautiful people, their values are good and set the pace for the rest of society. A telling story, as an example. On Ross Douthat's podcast, he asked Martin what the distinctively Christian contribution to sexuality is. And Martin, always carefully choosing his words, said that it was the Christian message about sex was that it should be a way of, quote, showing reverence to the other. Douthat gently pushed back on this, rightly pointing out that this is just a slightly spiritualized way of putting what most of his Manhattan admirers already think. Martin isn't exactly opposed to people going to Mass. It's just that that kind of Christian discipleship is superfluous to the beautiful people. And of course, if you are an elegant Manhattanite, the James Martin cause is one of your darlings. So of course, that cause is going to be one of Martin's darlings, and he's going to do it for what he does for anything else. He's going to tell you how Jesus already agrees with you, because as an elite, beautiful person, you must be a good person too. And he's going to try to craft a spirituality that fits your values. The really interesting thing about this confirmation episode then isn't even that it's a James Martin sin kind of thing. The really interesting thing is that it is a high society event. Martin is the chaplain to the beautiful people, and Gio Benitez is one of the beautiful people. So of course the socialite priest Martin is going to be there. One wonders whether the actual Jesus would approve of this rejection of his call to discipleship. One wonders if those issues were abstracted out, what Pope Francis would think of a priest who chooses to be the chaplain to the beautiful people. That certainly wasn't his vision for the church. Also, apart from Martin's really bad arguments for his approach to those sins and related issues, pitting the natural law against Jesus' teaching on love, revised to mean the unconditional affirmation of the expressive individualist self, one wonders whether his pastoral approach, at least his exoteric pastoral approach, really works in the long run. Martin's exoteric pastoral approach is to basically argue that we should begin by establishing positive regard for those people with those inclinations, and to acknowledge that to effectively challenge someone, you have to first have a relationship of mutual respect and trust. You can't just tell people that they're sinners and then congratulate yourself for being right and exorbitate the other person for not agreeing with you and being turned off. This much is certainly correct, but Martin runs into problems, at least in the exoteric version of his pastoral approach, because he thinks that you can appeal to the emotional fragility of those people to indefinitely delay the conversation about the conversion of life necessary to be a follower of Jesus. Now, of course, you should not delay this conversation indefinitely, but also you cannot delay it indefinitely, because eventually that person is going to have questions about how to reconcile his or her lifestyle with that of the rest of the church. The issue will not go away, and eventually it is going to have to be faced and resolved. And you're really just patronizing that person and stringing him along and manipulating him by continuing to tell him that he need not face that question. Again, another typo. Of course, Martin's esoteric teaching is probably that it's fine to do whatever you want generally with another person, so long as you intend it to be, as he put to Ross Douthat, an expression of reverence for the other. But even this won't work in the long run, because eventually you're going to have to reckon with the fact that Martin's esoteric approach to genital activity is simply not that of the church which he proclaims to represent, and of which you are a member. And you are eventually going to have to confront the dissonance between your lifestyle, what the church actually says about your lifestyle. So Martin's approach is really false compassion. That doesn't work in the long run. But Martin can always deny that his approach doesn't work, because he doesn't really think that spirituality is about conversion of life to the requirements of discipleship of Jesus as these have been understood by Christianity. And I don't really see where he's wrong here, except by one thing, and only one thing only. There's an omission here. He might be doing it out of charity. I have no inclination to be nearly so charitable to James Martin, because he has for many years now demonstrated that he is not to be trusted. But there is an underlying implication with James Martin's work. It has been reported repeatedly, I think even from James Martin himself, that his own superior, the superior general of the Jesuits, told him not to talk about his own inclinations with anybody. What kind of priest has to be told that? James Martin is an activist on that issue in particular. He has gone so far as to say that the Bible got it wrong, that St. Paul got it wrong, and by extension, the church has always been wrong on a key moral question, thus destroying magisterial authority and thus excommunicating himself because that makes him a heretic. But why is James Martin so interested in this question? I'm not the only one who's implied that James Martin is himself one of those kinds of people, though I have never said I believe James Martin is violating his vows. I don't believe he has, and I would not suggest that he has unless I had proof. I have no such proof, so I make no such claim. However, he is an activist on this issue, one that rejects the church's moral teaching. It is very personal to him, and his heresy cannot be excised from this conversation. It is more than being the chaplain to the beautiful people, as the priest rightfully calls it, because he is the poster child for the very definition of a celebrity priest. We're talking about a priest who gets onto CNN and every other news network that would have him, all with a leftward political slant. He is that priest, but he's more than that. He founded an organization that is an activist organization called Outreach. That's entire purpose is to agitate against the church's teachings and get the church to change its teachings on that sin. And that can't be separate from this. And the bishops don't do anything about him. They can ban him from their dioceses. You have to ask permission from your bishop before you go publicly doing things in the diocese. Every time you see like a guy like Trent Horn go around doing a talking giving a talk in some diocese, he has to get the permission from the bishop to do that. All of them do. James Martin included. Sometimes the bishop says no to James Martin. Doesn't make a big deal out of it, but tells him no. And so James Martin goes on and goes somewhere else. And every one of the bishops who lets him speak in their diocese are complicit. And that's the underlying question here. Why is Bishop Strickland the only one really willing to do this? Now, part of it is because he got canceled. But you'll notice he was saying this stuff before he got canceled. That's why he got canceled in the first place. Amazing stuff. But here's another reason why nobody stands up against James Martin. And this is not what I like showing, but we're not in the business of sugarcoating things. I've responded to a question overnight for somebody, do you ever do good news? I'm like, well, when good news happens, I'll show it to you. This is not good news. Here's why James Martin is emboldened. Nova Sorta Watch reports this. Leo XIV warmly receives a married James Martin type couple at the Vatican. This is poetic justice for the Rorate Celi blog, which just called the Novus Ordo confirmation of James Martin type in New York a Vatican II and Francis moment, conspicuously omitting any reference to Leo XIV. So there Leo is, leading the way in changing attitudes before doctrine. Link to an article from a very pro-Leo XIV website, from a very pro-Francis website. That's why. It goes right to the top. Numerous bishops, numerous cardinals, and others who claim to have been in the room when John the 23rd read the third secret of Fatima in 1960, all said the same thing. And these were cardinals from across the ideological spectrum, very progressive ones. I always go to Cardinal Chiappi for this. He was a progressive cardinal, very much a spirit of Vatican II kind of guy. And he said the third secret of Fatima detailed an apostasy in the church led from the top. You'll remember that in the 1940s, Sister Lucia was ordered to write down the third secret of Fatima. She said she couldn't do it until she was ordered to by her superior, and then she had to pray for the grace to be able to do it, because the third secret of Fatima contained something so terrible that she could not write it down without her hand shaking to the point of it being illegible, not readable. An apostasy in the church led from the top. I don't know what else that would be other than that picture I just showed you. Dean called it a synodal encounter. Well, synodal encounters are very much the kind of thing that people who James Martin are advocating for are really into. Sal Brown with a generous super chat. I do thank you. During the pandemic, because churches were closed and no masses, I reasoned that God was on vacation. So now that we have a new church, does Satan now have a new way of leading people to hell? The Pope doesn't explain. For those who bristle at the term new church, the synodalists, those organizing the Synod on Synodality, called it the new synodal church. They call what we have now a new church. And what is a new church but a new institution for a new religion? Their words. They told us this repeatedly. A new church has new morals, new standards, and a new understanding of Jesus Christ, of course. Antonio with the super chat. I am so scared for my soul. I know I must follow our leader, the Pope. I also know that some acts have taken place that go against the traditional Catholic Church. This is why I always tell you to pray for him. The greatest act of charity you can do is to pray for somebody, for their conversion and the saving of their soul. So pray for them. Anytime I report to you bad news, pray for them. Pray for their interior conversion or for their soul to be illumined and their heart and mind to be illuminated by God so they can see what it is they're doing. I do the same every day. Now, at the beginning of this, I said I would show you what the bishops were really doing when Bishop Strickland was interrupting them. So, to recap, there was a big meeting of the bishops, the U.S. bishops. They have this annual meeting where they elected a new president and a new vice president. As I covered recently, the progressives were very mad that the Archbishop of Oklahoma City was elected to be the new president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And while he has some questionable things that he has done, look at the work of the Lepanto Institute and his reaction to that if you need an example, the progressives were mad. And he has a good track record on being at least friendly to the traditional mass to some degree. teaching Catholic morality and all these other things that you would want from a senior prelate in the United States. But they were very mad. However, the new leadership of the USCCB is fully on board with the immigration program promoted by the Vatican. The National Catholic Reporter gives us this story of what the bishops were really doing, were really focused on, despite everything collapsing in terms of morality. So the headline: U.S. bishops show solidarity with immigrants, approve Catholic healthcare directives banning the the twisting of the flesh. But be careful with that topic on these platforms. They don't like you criticizing it. Now, I will say, while I am very much against what the U.S. bishops are doing on the migration issue, because they are distorting the church teaching on it, I 100% agree, and I'm very happy to see they're taking on the healthcare issue. Very happy to see it. They need to take a more firm stand than they have, and this should make the progressives very sad, because they want the church to just affirm everybody and their wild ideas about themselves. Here's what they had to say. The U.S. Catholic bishops on November 12th approved a special pastoral message on immigration that expresses the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' collective solidarity with immigrants amid the Trump administration's aggressive enforcement tactics. In their 618-word statement, the bishops said that they are, quote, disturbed to see a climate of fear and anxiety pertaining to questions of racial profiling and immigration enforcement. The prelates added that they are, quote, saddened by the state of contemporary immigration debate and the vilification of immigrants. We are concerned about the conditions in detention centers and the lack of access to pastoral care, the bishop said. We lament that some immigrants in the U.S. have arbitrarily lost their legal status. We are troubled by threats against the sanctity of houses of worship and the special nature of hospitals and schools. We are grieved when we meet parents who fear being detained when taking their children to school, and when we try to console family members who have already been separated from their loved ones. Praising the generations of immigrants who have made enormous contributions to the well-being of our nation, the U.S. bishops said they felt compelled to raise their voices in defense of God-given human dignity. The bishops called for comprehensive immigration reform and said they recognize the right of nations to regulate their borders to protect the common good. At least they recognize that much. Human dignity and national security are not in conflict. Both are possible if people of goodwill work together, the bishop said. End quote. Now I've reported elsewhere recently that the bishops, at least some of them, Bishop Seats, I think is how you say his name, of San Antonio or El Paso, that's where he is. He is becoming the public face of this debate. You're going to see him in 2026 making the media rounds, because 2026 is an election year. And I guarantee you the Democratic Party is going to campaign against the Trump administration's immigration programs, despite them being broadly popular with the American public. The entire point of him doing all of that will be to push Catholics to turn on the administration and to vote for Democrats. Historically, Catholics have voted for Democrats in large numbers. It's going to get political very quickly, overtly so. And Bishop Seats recently endorsed a bipartisan bill that will go nowhere in the House right now, that would give a legal status to everybody who arrived here illegally up until 2021. Not amnesty so much, but it does have access to citizenship and things like that for those who wish to then go through the system. This is the golden calf on this issue for the Democrats, who are importing a whole new voter base for themselves. That's what this is about. And the U.S. bishops seem to be on board with it. Now, as others have pointed out, and I have pointed out as well, they have made a lot more money than they admit on this issue through the complex schemes involving U.S. federal government funding, how a not-for-profit organization can accept a large contract from the U.S. government to achieve a policy end of any kind, and then they will subcontract out with other nonprofit organizations and disperse that money, keeping a small portion for themselves, and on it goes. And the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops have done this. And every Catholic charity in the United States that calls itself Catholic has to give a portion of their grant money to the U.S. bishops, or to the bishop of the diocese they're in. Not directly to his pockets, obviously, but to the diocese. That's how it works. And so the U.S. bishops can say they've never made money on this, but they are not being truthful. They are receiving money from the government directly, and they're receiving money from other nonprofit organizations for this issue. A lot of it. I've gone over the numbers before. But that's why they do this. It's not only that they have a gospel-driven mission to help the poor and the traveler, but when it comes to bending and twisting the gospel, never underestimate the power of greed and money to grease the skids of this. Over the last several decades, the U.S. bishops have willfully participated in the development of a gigantic nonprofit bureaucracy attached to the Catholic Church for its corporal works of mercy. Much of the work they do is good, much of it not so good. Also, Lepanto Institute has done a masterful job of showing where the U.S. bishops contract with anti-Christian organizations, sometimes overtly promoting literal pagan worship in places with your tithing dollars. And yet, for whatever reason, the bishops, knowing this, continue anyway. Because never underestimate the power of money. We're talking millions upon millions of dollars every year, adding up to billions upon billions of dollars over the course of decades to let money override their sense of faith. Not every bishop, but a lot of them. They know because many of them sit on the boards of things like Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities, Caritas Internationalis, and these other organizations that have all accepted federal funding for this. Back in November, I think it would have been on the 6th, just a couple days after the election, I got on this channel and warned people that you're going to see the U.S. bishops start acting weird. They were going to openly resist the Trump administration. And it was going to be around immigration and a few other issues. And they were going to become practically a partisan organization for the Democratic Party. I was not happy to be right about that. And it became especially obvious when Trump got up there and started talking about Doge and how they were going to cut all the funding for everything. And he did that at least until about April or May of this year, when suddenly they backed off of it a little bit or a lot. Doge stopped being a news item, mostly when the Republicans in the House and Senate said, stop, you're doing too much. But the damage to the bishops was done. USAID was destroyed. Catholic Charities had much of its funding destroyed. And now what do we have? Bishops obsessed, diabolically so, with this issue to the point where they will pay lip service to Catholic social teaching, but are willing to subvert the society that they are supposed to be the shepherds of, all in the name of a twisting of the gospel. It's absolutely amazing to watch. I'm very curious what you think about this. So Napoleon Solo says, getting back to Father Peter, who are the grifters now? He said Bishop Strickland is a grifter. That's what he said. For the reason I went over, and he explained it in his thing there. I'll have all the links for that, as well as the story, in the show notes at the Anthony Stine Substack not long after this is over. But I'm very curious, as a general rule, what do you think of the bishop's statements on immigration that happened out at their big annual meeting? This would have been done after they had a new president elected. A new president who is very good on some issues, but is completely committed to the U.S. bishop's stance on immigration. They act as one voice. I wish I had it pulled up here to show you, but even Archbishop Sample in Portland, Oregon, joined in on the immigration thing. They speak united, unified in one voice on this. But again, let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Please pray for everybody I spoke about today, especially those I spoke about negatively. First law of the church is salvation of souls, and it is a great act of charity to pray for those whom you believe to be in error. So please do so. And again, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.